All right, let's talk about one of the biggest and maybe one of the most misunderstood pieces of labor legislation out there, the PRO Act. Now, supporters will tell you it's this desperately needed lifeline for American workers. But what if it's more complicated than that? What if it could actually hurt the very people it's supposed to protect? Let's dig in. I mean, look, on the surface, who's going to argue with protecting a worker's right to organize? It feels like a no-brainer, but good intentions don't always make for good policy. The real test is about the results. And the big question we're tackling today is whether the PRO Act solutions might just create a whole new set of problems. And the problem, at least as supporters see it, boils down to this number. Just over 6%. That's the percentage of private sector workers in a union today. It's an all-time low, a massive drop from what it used to be. And for the folks pushing the PRO Act, this is Exhibit A, the smoking gun that proves American labor law is fundamentally broken. And that brings us to the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, or PRO Act for short. This thing is a total overhaul of labor law. The whole point is to reverse that decline by making it way easier for unions to get in the door and a lot harder for employers to push back. People have called it the dream wish list for organized labor. So here's the plan. First, we're going to question the whole reason the bill even exists. Then we'll dive into two of its biggest changes, one that messes with the secret ballot and another that brings back a seriously powerful and controversial economic weapon. And finally, we'll look at the actual data to see if this whole thing is even solving the right problem. Okay, part one. Before you can really judge a solution, you got to make sure you're clear on the problem. And the PRO Act is built on a very specific idea about why union membership fell off a cliff. You see, the entire argument for this bill really hangs on one single idea, that unions are shrinking because big bad corporations are using illegal tactics and our weak labor laws can't stop them. It's a really simple, powerful story. But is it the true story? Now, this is where it gets interesting. Take a look at who said this. This isn't some corporate mouthpiece. This is William Gold. He was the chairman of the National Labor Relations Board appointed by a Democrat, President Clinton. And he calls the idea that just changing the law will magically bring unions back a false narrative. I mean, wow. That's a pretty heavy critique coming from an insider like him. So if it's not just the law, what's really going on? Well, the evidence points to much bigger things. I'm talking huge economic shifts, right? Moving from factory jobs to office and tech jobs. Plus, we've passed tons of other federal laws, like for workplace safety and against discrimination, protections you used to only get from a union. And here's the kicker. This isn't just happening in America. Union membership is dropping in most developed countries. That tells you the causes are probably global, not just a problem with U.S. law. So if the whole premise of the bill is kind of shaky, what about the specific things it tries to do? Let's get into the nitty-gritty, and we'll start with a change that could completely upend how a union gets recognized, even after it loses an election. Okay, so right now, the secret ballot election is everything. It's the sacred way we figure out what workers actually want, free from pressure. To throw out that vote and force a company to recognize a union that lost, the government has to clear a super high bar. It's called the Gissel Standard. Basically, the employer's behavior has to be so bad, so completely out of line, that there's no way to have a fair do-over. It's a last resort for extreme situations. The PRO Act comes in and just flips this whole standard on its head. Just look at the difference here. The burden of proof completely shifts. It goes from the government having to prove the company's actions did mess up the election to the company having to prove that its actions probably didn't. That is a huge, huge change. And here's the key. How on earth does a company prove a negative? How do you prove that something you did was unlikely to have influenced the private thoughts of dozens or hundreds of people? You can't. And get this, it's a total catch-22. The easiest way to find out, actually asking your employees how they voted and why, is also illegal. It basically creates an impossible situation where almost any minor mistake could be used to invalidate an election. But the PRO Act doesn't stop at the workplace store. Oh, no. It also wants to change the rules of the game for the whole economy by bringing back a tactic that was outlawed decades ago because it was just too chaotic. So, what is this tactic? It's called a secondary boycott. And it's basically a way for a union to spread the pain. Instead of just protesting at your own company, let's call it Company A, you go after their customers, their suppliers, anyone they do business with. Company B, C, and D. You try to squeeze Company A by hurting all the innocent bystanders around them. The law bans this right now to protect those neutral businesses. This is a perfect example of how it works. It's like a domino effect. The union has a beef with the logging company. So what do? They go picket a totally neutral furniture store just because it buys wood from that company. The store's customers get scared off, so the store has to drop the logging company. See? The logging company gets hurt, and the furniture store, which had nothing to do with it, gets caught in the crossfire. It's collateral damage, and that's the whole point.
And look, this isn't just some dusty old textbook theory. We have a very real, very recent, and very, very expensive example of what happens when these tactics get used, even when they're illegal. Let's head over to the Port of Oregon.
What happened here is a true cautionary tale. A union dispute over just 2 jobs spiraled into years of illegal work slowdowns. The shipping companies, who were totally neutral, couldn't risk having their ships stuck in port, so they just took their business elsewhere. The ripple effect was an absolute disaster. The entire terminal had to shut down. We're talking massive job losses, and it absolutely crushed local farmers and exporters who depended on that port. The whole thing was so destructive that a federal jury found the union's actions were illegal and awarded the terminal operator, get this, almost $94 million in damages. The PRO Act would make these kinds of destructive tactics legal again, potentially unleashing this on countless businesses across the country. So, we have a bill that's built on a shaky foundation and has some really scary potential consequences. But what about that core argument we talked about? The idea that we need this bill because of a massive spike in illegal anti-union activity? Well, let's follow the evidence. So you hear this all the time from supporters. Companies are more lawless than ever. They're breaking the rules left and right to stop unions, so we need the PRO Act to crack down on them. It's a major selling point for the bill. But is it actually true? What does the government's own data say? This right here is the data. It's straight from the National Labor Relations Board, the agency in charge, and it tracks the number of these unfair labor practice charges filed against employers for decades. And the trend? Well, it's crystal clear. The numbers aren't going up, they are going down, way down. I mean, let that sink in. The number of charges alleging illegal anti-union activity has been chopped by more than half. And that's during a time when the number of workers in the U.S. has grown by millions. The data just doesn't back up the story that there's some kind of crisis of employer lawlessness that needs a radical solution like this. So let's just recap. What are these hidden costs we're talking about? The PRO Act creates a back doorway to install a union that workers literally voted no on. It opens the door to punishing neutral businesses and their employees with secondary boycotts. It seems designed to create more conflict, not less. And all of this is built on a foundation, this false narrative that bad laws are the main problem that just doesn't seem to hold up.
Which leaves us with this one last question. The bill's goal is to protect workers. But when a policy seems to be based on a flawed idea and it threatens to undermine something as basic as the secret ballot, and it could cause widespread harm to innocent people, you have to step back and ask, who does it really protect? Something to think about. Thanks for watching.